Welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Rami. I'm an RN/BSN, and today's video is going to be about the top 10 nurse job interview questions that I got asked at quite a few of my interviews. So if you are new here, go ahead and click that red subscribe button and join this family. And also in this video, I'm going to be talking about kind of like how I answered these questions. So hopefully if you guys are watching this video, you guys have just graduated. Congratulations to you. Hopefully this video will help you with your job interview and help you practice the questions that you need to. And if you haven't already, go ahead and check out my other video, which is 5 uncommon interview tips that may help you with your interview as well. So let's go ahead and get right into the video. So the first question I got asked at a lot of interviews was to tell me about yourself. Now this may seem a little nerve-wracking because obviously you know all about yourself, but it's weird to kind of figure out or pinpoint what experiences in your life you have to tell the interviewer. This question can be a little bit challenging because you know all about your life and they clearly know quite a bit about your life with your resume sitting right in front of them. So what exactly are you going to say to them? And this question really sets the tone for the entire interview because it shows how you communicate and it shows like what parts of your life and nursing experience you can kind of bring into the interview, and they'll kind of play off the rest of the interview or the next question at least just from this question. So it's really important to have a good prompt that you've prepared to start off the interview well and to make sure the rest of your interview is successful. So the way I answered this question was very simple. I just started off with the class I was in, so senior 1 or senior 2, depending on what class you're in, and then the school I'm from, and then I went on and talked about my leadership positions. So I was SNA or Student Nursing Association vice president at the time, so I made sure to put that in, and then I talked about what kind of job positions I held, if it related to nursing. So at the time I was a patient care tech at a hospital, so I kind of talked about the skills I got working as a patient care tech, such as teamwork, collaboration, being able to learn from the other nurses, being in a hospital environment, things like that. And then I kind of ended with, and I hope to use these skills like to benefit like my next nursing job position. So that's how I answered that question. The next question I got, and this question I probably got every single interview, maybe 1 or 2 didn't have them, but this question was very common. And if you guys watched my other video, which was the 5 uncommon interview tips, I talked about how I couldn't answer a question in my very first interview because I was just so nervous. I didn't know how to answer it, and it was this question. So the question is, name a time you're in an ethical dilemma. So this question was pretty hard for me to answer, and after I missed the question in my first interview, I took some time to think about it, and I used the same answer for every single interview after that. So how I answered it was basically in clinicals, I was shadowing a nurse, and we were handing out medications at the time, and so how it works is like you scan the medication, you scan the patient's armband first. So what had happened was when we were giving medication, she scanned the patient's armband and then she scanned the medication, and the little pop-up on the computer said like patient dose exceeded. So it basically meant we had to cut like the pill in half. And this pill specifically, like I remember what it was lithium. I had just learned in my psych class that there's a really big thing about lithium toxicity. So I was like, oh yeah, so we have to cut this pill in half to the nurse, right? And she was like, I just scanned it twice, like that's why it's popping up, but we're gonna give it as it is. And I was like, okay, this is definitely a whole dose. We're supposed to be giving it half. I kind of thought about it in my head and I was like, how am I going to tell this nurse, who has way more years experience than me, who's just a nursing student, like how do I tell her that we have to cut this pill in half? So I told her that I was still learning drug calc medication doses in class, and I'm learning about lithium in psych class, and if we can kind of just go over the medications once again. And I realized that I was probably annoying her, but she agreed, and she was like, okay, like let me go over this really quick. And she was like, blah blah. When we got to lithium, she was like, oh yeah, this is actually going to be 0.5 instead of 1 milligram or whatever the dose was. That's when she realized that she had made a mistake. But yeah, she realized that it was supposed to be half, and it could have been a really big ethical situation there, but I kind of told them like how I had to take a step back and kind of just tell them that I was a student to prevent an ethical dilemma happening. And I was really glad that I did it because, you know, I was trying to be a patient advocate without, you know, trying to go over this nurse who had so many years over me. And yeah, so that's the answer I used for every single question. So the third question I got, and this was at every single job interview, and it's probably going to be at yours, the top 3 strengths and weaknesses. So what I had prepared was 3 strengths and 1 weakness. So if you guys do that, you should be good. I never needed more than that. This question can be disguised as different forms of questions. Like, for example, one job interview asked me, so if your friends had 1 good thing and 1 bad thing to say about you, what would they say? So that was basically like, oh, what strength and what weakness like would they say about you? Or some are just straight up. So they'll just ask you, name your top 3 strengths and a weakness, or name 1 strength and weakness. So it just depends on the interviewer and how it goes, but make sure you kind of realize whenever they're asking you your strengths and weaknesses in a different form. This question can be pretty difficult if you don't really know your strengths or you don't really know what you're good at. So I recommend doing whatever I did, which was Strength Finders 2.0, and I'm not really sure how much this book is. I can link it in the description, but this is a book that we had to have for our nursing leadership class, and it kind of makes you take a quiz. There's like a little, you know, freebie link in the first on the first page of the book, and you take a quiz and it gives you your 5 strengths, which is a lot of strengths to choose from, and I just chose my top 3, the ones that are kind of easiest to talk about. And what our nursing leadership class made us do was take it in the beginning of the semester, and by the time we presented like our project by the end of the semester, we would kind of talk about how we developed these strengths and kind of made them like ours. So it's really easy to determine your strengths using this book because it kind of talks about every single strength. Like there's like a title for every single one. Like your strengths are more like themes. So there's like achiever, activator, arranger, there's different things like commander, developer, things like that. So your strength is more of a theme. My top 3 strengths were achiever, activator, and like positivity, I believe. And it's kind of easy to get ideas for these strengths and like how to explain it to the interviewers. And kind of like relate it to your future job. So for example, having positivity is really important for like the nursing work environment, and it's really important to prevent burnout, things like that. So I used my strengths to kind of show how I could benefit like their organization with my strengths. So for my weakness, I had the same weakness every single time, and they never asked me more than 1. They always just asked for 1. And it's really, really important, and it's key here to make sure that you're able to turn your weakness into something that's actually good. You're kind of hiding something that's good or something that you've changed over time with this weakness. So it's really important to be able to do that with this. So what I kind of did was tell them that my weakness was I put too much on myself, and they were able to kind of see that in my first question when I told them about myself. Like I was SNA vice president, I was captain of the volleyball team, so I played sports the entire time in college. I worked as a patient care tech, so I obviously did a lot of things in nursing school. So I kind of used that as my weakness, but out of that I was able to have really good time management. So I was able to use all those things, like putting too much on myself, where I didn't have like enough time to focus on things very much in the beginning, but towards the end I had really good time management. I was able to focus on every single thing that I did and do them well. So that's how I used a weakness and kind of hit it into something really good. So the 4th question I got was, name a time you received negative feedback. What did you do and what happened? This question wasn't as common, but I still did get it a few times during my interviews. So the way I answered it was basically as a student, there was a nurse I was with. It was great. She never gave me like any negativity, any negative feedback. until she filled out the clinical form that we had to give them, and she put a few negative things on there that I didn't even know about and that she didn't even tell me about. Like, I wasn't on time when she told me. So she was actually a team lead, and it was for my leadership clinical. And she came like at 6 a.m. to kind of like do boards and huddle and do some management things in the morning. So she usually always came at 6, but she told me to come at my regular time, which was 7 a.m., which was change of shift time and when most nurses came. So she told me in the very beginning it would be fine if I came at 7. So for her to write that, like, I was a little confused because my clinical instructor was a little upset about that, and she was like, why weren't you on time? And like, I'm going to take off points for this. So I had to go back to her. It was actually at the hospital where I worked at. It was just a different floor. So the way I handled it was go back to her and talk to her in person about why I received this negative feedback. And we kind of talked it out, and she like hadn't realized that she had told me that. I guess she had a lot of family things going on at the time she wrote it. So she said overall, like, I was a good student. She didn't mean for it to come off negatively to me or my clinical instructor, so it may have just been a miscommunication. I'm not really sure what's going on her end, because I had a really good time with her. So I think they want to ask you this question to make sure that you like don't go crazy on people, or like if something negative were to happen like in the hospital, like kind of how you would handle it. So the 5th question I got asked, this was also a type of question that may be asked like in a different form, but it was basically like, name a time you had a disagreement with a coworker. So if you haven't had any jobs before this, if you're in nursing school, you can also use like a time in clinicals maybe. But the way I answered it was I never really had any disagreements with coworkers. I did get this question quite a few times, so they're kind of trying to see like how you would handle disagreements. So since I never really had a disagreement with a coworker, there was a time where I had a coworker who was always asking me to do things as a patient care tech. She was a nurse. During vital signs or during blood sugars, I worked day shift, so it was really, really busy as a patient care tech. I was a med-surg patient care tech, so of course it's super, super busy, especially during vitals times, because you also have to draw sugars around those times as well. So I usually took me like an hour, hour and a half to do, and this one nurse, she always asked me to do like little things during this time. I was taking vitals, it was around lunchtime I believe, and she was like, oh, patient 1 and 2, I have to give them their blood pressure pills. I need to take a pressure before and then 15 minutes after for each of them. I'm going to give it like in a little bit. Are you able to take these pressures? And like, she's asked me this like while I'm taking, I had basically the whole floor, which is about like 25-30 patients usually. So as techs, we usually split it up. So it's usually 15 per side, but this time we were short-staffed, of course. So I had the entire floor. So this nurse was like, oh, well, I'm about to give blood pressure pills to like room 1 and 2, like I don't remember the rooms, and I need a pressure before, 15 minutes after, and 30 minutes after, and then just like hung up the phone. Like I was supposed to do that like while I'm taking blood pressures and sugars for all these people, for 30 people, and she didn't realize that I was so busy. Just because she was so busy with her patients, I guess she didn't realize like my workload. So how I handled it was I called her back and I was like, oh, hey, I'm kind of doing vitals at this time. I have all these blood sugars to do. We don't have a tech for the other side. Like I'm doing that as well. Like I'm able to help you out if you can wait 30-40 minutes. But right now I'm just a little bit busy doing all these vitals and sugars for all the other nurses and your patients as well. And that's when she was like, oh no, like I didn't realize you had the whole floor today. Like I'm so sorry, blah, blah. Like I'll do it myself basically. So that's kind of like the situation I used. It wasn't like that great, but it was a good situation to use where I didn't really necessarily agree with a coworker. So yeah, that's how I went about fixing the problem. Hopefully you guys have other situations you can use, like in clinical experience where you didn't agree with a nurse you had, or maybe a professor or clinical instructor, maybe even a friend if you haven't had that many disagreements. So the 6th question I had was, tell me about a time you had a difficult patient. So this question also wasn't as common as the other ones, but I still did get it maybe 2 or 3 times. So this is actually a really good question if you had like a difficult patient in nursing school or in clinicals. Maybe you had a patient that was rude, which we get quite a bit, or maybe you had a patient that had like a lot of tubes and drains and lines, and they're just a very busy patient. Maybe you can use one of those stories as well. But the story I used was from whenever I was also a tech. And this patient basically had dementia, and he was swinging and doing all these things that he wasn't doing the past like few days I had him. So I had to basically call a code white, and a really big thing that I did was made sure he was safe. He was trying to like get into other patients' rooms, and he was just screaming. So I had to make sure that he and others were safe while the nurses were like getting the Ativan and Haldol and whatever else he needed. So yeah, that's basically what I did and how I answered that question. That was pretty like a simple, fast one, but this one's kind of an easy one to also do because we have lots of difficult patients like in nursing school, so hopefully you can use one of those stories and kind of make sure that you kind of tell them like how you helped out in the situation and how you made sure the patient was safe, how the nurse was safe, like how you kept yourself safe maybe. And then they'll kind of help you answer that question. So the 7th question was a question I only got one time, but it did throw me off a little, so I kind of wanted to add it in this video to make sure that if you get it, it doesn't throw you off. So the question I had was, tell me a time you had to connect something from the book to a real life scenario. So that question's a little weird and it kind of threw me off. But the question was for my OB position currently. So I definitely had to use like an OB story. And by the way, if you don't know the answer to a question, you are always welcome to say, can I have a moment to think about this? Or give me a moment to think about this. And that's what I had to say in this situation, most definitely. The interviewers will totally understand. They don't think you're going to know every single question like immediately. So if you don't know the answer, take 30 seconds, take a minute to think about it before you just make up something random that's going to embarrass you or make up something that's going to affect your interview. So what I had used was I told them about how I learned in OB class about the stages of labor. Like the first stage was like when the woman starts feeling contractions and then she begins to dilate, compared to the second stage of labor where she's completely opened, fully dilated, and then she begins to push. So I told them like how, you know, it's weird like reading it like in a book and then coming to clinicals and being able to like check the patient and check their progression of labor, how they went from a 2 to a 4 and how I was able to be there, start the Pitocin and do all those things as a nursing student. I just said I felt very affected by it and I was able to learn a lot, being able to actually be there and pull their legs back and help them start pushing. That's kind of the story I used, something that I was able to read in a book and then kind of apply it to real life, and just how like different it is to kind of read about it and then experience it in real life. But yeah, that question was a little weird. I definitely had to think about that one. So if you do get that question, let me know in the comments. It was a little different, but yeah, I just had to throw it in there in case you get it. So the 8th question I did get quite a few times as well, and this question is going to be towards the end of the interview, and it's, why should we hire you? And this question is similar to number 1. It's kind of about telling them about yourself, but it's going to be your elevator speech. And if you haven't heard about the elevator speech, imagine you are in an elevator with another person and you had just that elevator ride, that 30-second, 1-minute ride to tell them about yourself. Imagine you're in the elevator with your interviewer who's going to hire you within that elevator ride, basically. So what you're supposed to do is elevate yourself, hype yourself up for that 30-second period before they get off the elevator, and by the time they get off the elevator, they know if they're going to hire you or not. So that's what your elevator speech is, and that's how you answer this question. Why should we hire you? Basically tell them about yourself and your skills, everything that you can do to benefit the organization, and that's how you're going to get them to hire you. So I always made sure to do a little bit of research about the organization before I went for the interview. So if they had some kind of phrase in their organization, I would make sure to kind of add it into my elevator speech. So if it was like a passion for healing, I would kind of say, yeah, blah blah, and with all these skills I hope to promote a better passion for healing, and that's kind of how I would end it. So make sure you end it kind of with them knowing that you know a little bit about their organization, and it'll definitely help them remember you and why they would want to hire you, because you will be an asset to them. 9th question is, tell us about a time where you had to effectively educate a patient or their family members. This one I only got one time as well, and this one also threw me off. but this one should be pretty easy if you've had a few clinical experiences where you had to educate the family, which is where I got my answer from. Basically, I had a patient who had to like get a certain medication. I believe it was Lovenox, which is the blood thinner that you just push in your belly, and I basically had to educate her on how to use it. A good amount of the charting systems have like a description of the medication, like Lexicomp for example. You can print out the education materials of that medication, so that's what my nurse helped me to do. I printed out the education information about this medication, and then I basically taught the patient how to use it and the dosages and all those things before she was getting discharged. So kind of think about those experiences as well. And the last question I have is, why did you choose our hospital? So this may seem similar to tell us about yourself or why should we hire you. It's kind of more towards what aspects did you like about their organization or their hospital. So if you did like things like their research programs, or if you're trying to be like a neurotele nurse, maybe you liked how they're one of the top neuroscience research centers in the city or in the state. Maybe you liked how they're a magnet hospital. Maybe you liked how they're a level 1 trauma hospital. Just make sure you do your research before going into the interview, and you will be able to name things that you do like about the hospital. If you did apply for the hospital, you should know why you like it. But if you do your research, you will definitely know a lot more things about the hospital and more things you can name. And if you know more about the unit, throw that in there as well. But yeah, those are the top 10 nurse job interview questions that I got. If you follow along, have good stories, have good clinical experiences that you can share, you should own this interview and get the job. So go ahead and like this video. Let me know in the comments if you do get this job, and hopefully this video helped you. And if you are preparing for an interview, good luck to you. You're gonna do awesome. And yeah, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and leave me a comment. See you in the next video.